Well, okay, we're recording.
Great. I'll let you start.
Hi, I'm Cindy Perlin, and I'm here with Dr. Eric Pepper to talk about tech stress, and how to keep it from hijacking your life. Dr. Pepper is an international authority on biofeedback and self-regulation. He's a professor of holistic health studies at the San Francisco State University. He's president of the Biofeedback Foundation of Europe, and he's past president of the Association for Applied Psychophysiology and Biofeedback. He's the author of numerous articles and books, and his latest one is Tech Stress: How Technology is Hijacking Our Lives, Strategies for Coping, and Pragmatic Ergonomics, and that was published just last month. He also publishes a blog, The Pepper Perspective. Hello, Dr. Pepper. Thank you for joining me.
Well, Cindy, it's such a pleasure to have this opportunity to share with you and just have a lovely discussion, and to meet with the other participants in your group to answer questions which hopefully will be useful. I thought, since I teach at San Francisco State, it may be just useful to make a few comments about Zoom guidelines, because some of you are so familiar with it that all you do is you get Zoom fatigue. I know that. And others are a little bit unsure of it. And just like for me, it took a while, as I teach at San Francisco State, to get used to it and to feel a little bit familiar. So let me go through a few guidelines, and they should just be comfortable. One, if possible, turn your video on. You can see this at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It says there's a stop video symbol with a line through it. If you click on that, it will turn your video on. It's so much nicer to see when it goes on, because then I can see you. And now I've seen at least two of you, and it makes it much easier, because all of a sudden you become real people. And I think that's one. Two, we'll ask you to keep the audio off. And if you want to put in, well, with a small group, you can even just raise your hand. I can probably see it. Or you just turn your audio on for a moment and say, "Excuse me, I have a question." It makes it more interactive. Or if that feels uncomfortable, at the bottom of the screen is something called chat. It's this little, you click on that and you can type in something, and hopefully me or Cindy will be monitoring that and to be able to answer. Do allow us, for the awkwardness that occurs, partly because of COVID, partly we may have a cat running in onto our lap, or our children are all of a sudden coming around, or whatever, and because of the technological challenges at time of bandwidth or anything else. And finally, provide lots of feedback. It's hard because when we just look at the screen, we're just looking, our faces stop. But for a presenter such as Cindy and myself, exaggerate your responses. So if you like something, go, "Yes, great." If you don't like something, boo. I mean it in the nicest way. It makes you become alive, and it makes it more interactive. It's really challenging. So please do that. And obviously, if you have any questions, ask that. So on that note of this world of tech and challenges, Cindy, you have questions, or what?
Yes, I do, a lot of them.
Great.
So tell us how you got interested in this topic of tech stress.
It really came from the observation working with clients. Many years ago, another therapist asked me to work with one of their clients who had severe neck and shoulder pain, and that was called repetitive, at that time, repetitive strain injury, as the person was working at the computer. And that therapist was going on holiday, so they farmed their client off to me. And then I looked at that client, and my training is biofeedback and self-regulation, where you can monitor with equipment what the muscles are doing or what breathing is doing. And then I talked to this client, and I looked at this man, and he said he already had a very good ergonomic assessment at his work, a great ergonomist who had adjusted the right, the keyboard at the right height, sitting perfectly, correctly, etc. And he still had this horrible problem. And then I looked at him just even with my eyes, and then I realized what people weren't doing was being aware of what was happening inside the person. So then we monitored the muscle tensions on his shoulder, his breathing pattern, and then we observed the obvious. When he was sitting there and working, his shoulders went up, except he was totally unaware of it. He had no idea when he was mousing, he was freezing his body. And that's what he was doing all the time. He had no awareness that he was breathing shallowly, rapidly in his chest, almost like a subclinical hyperventilation, totally without any awareness. So the key is in that perspective initially, when you're working at the computer or any job, you can have the perfect chair. A perfect chair gives you the opportunity to sit correctly. However, it doesn't mean you'll sit correctly. You can still sit with anger, with rage, with tension. On the other hand, an incorrect adjusted chair makes it very difficult to sit that way. So that's how we really started in that sense of perspective. I don't know how many of you work on computers. Probably all of us do now. By definition, you're doing this, right? Because you've been spending your whole last 6 months, well, more or less, basically learning, working, dating for some of you, socializing, communicating, all online. And with that, often most of us use mouses or keyboards. So let me give you the subjective experience. What is the process? Because it doesn't do much good to just talk about it. What I'd like you all to do, if that's okay, is take your mouse or take an object like a mouse. I take something in my hand. I put it equivalently like a mouse next to my keyboard. And once it's next to my keyboard, with this mouse, in a moment, not yet, I'm going to ask you to write the address of your street address, the letters, draw the letters with the mouse, but start with the last letter, not the first letter of the street address. So if my street address is Derby Street, the last letter is T, I draw that last letter. Don't do it yet. Then once I've done the T, I click, then I draw the E, etc. Is the task clear? This means yes. This means no. Okay, great. I see if I do this, I also wiggle and move, so I feel better. Now what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to make each letter only a ½ inch in height or smaller. So that's much more challenging. Notice it's very fine detailed work with that mouse to the side of the keyboard. Are you ready? Yes? Great. Start. And do it as quickly as possible. Quicker. Don't make a mistake. Quicker, quicker, quicker. Keep drawing each letter. Click each time. Quicker. And as you're doing this, are you holding your breath? Are you tightening your shoulders? Are you stiffening your trunk? You can all stop. I think we are all different, but I think I saw a few say with their heads, yes. I don't know for the people who are not, who are on the phone because they may be driving or something. But notice you were not really aware of that till I brought your attention to it. That is what the biofeedback did, Cindy, the same way. So when you monitor these muscle tensions, all of a sudden on the screen, they could see this. That truly is the magic of the biofeedback more than anything. And then the person could go, huh, I didn't even know it. And then the training occurs. How can I work without these misdirected ongoing tensions? And what you could have heard in a moment was a kind of gong or sound. I don't know if you heard that for a moment. Well, I have a program on my computer that reminds me to do stretch breaks. Because when I work at the computer, I get captivated. I'm just captured and I work and all of a sudden time passes and I have totally been frozen in place. So this program, which you can download as an app and install on your computer, doesn't cost anything, is called Stretch Break. Stretchbreak.com, and I can type it into the chat box if you like, which I will do right now. And so I'll type in stretchbreak.com. And it's a little app that is free. You can install it in your computer and you can set it so, let's say every 20 minutes, every 30 minutes, it would remind you to wiggle and move. And I find it remarkably helpful. So just do that for a moment. So for example, stand up. I know. And notice how hard it is to stand. I know you have to be careful with Zoom because we're only formally dressed from the waist up. I realize that. So who knows what you're wearing, beneath your waist. Maybe your PJs. But anyway, as you're standing up, bring your hands, interlace the fingers. Now bring them way overhead. And now just make circles. One way and then the other way. Really reach up. And then interlace the hands the out way. And now do the same thing. Really go around. And keep breathing. And you're supposed to smile at the same time. Good enough. And now sit down.
That feels better.
And
So-
how many notice you feel a little more alive, a little looser? Yes? I think most of
We're
you.
awake.
Awake. That is what happens with Zoom fatigue. Cindy, we just get exhausted. And we don't interrupt our patterns. It's totally abnormal how we work.
Yeah, so that leads me into my next question, because you talk in your book about how we didn't evolve to sit all day. And it's just what we do, how we live now is so inconsistent with our evolution. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, it is my favorite topic, and we described it in detail in the book. It's really the concept that you have to look at the human being not from today, but from their evolutionary past. We have many behaviors which allowed us, which evolved in a sense, or were not selected during evolution to allow us to survive and to reproduce. And they are, for example, to attend to stimuli outside of ourselves. So if we see something happening, we react to it. And so think of how we used to be as a hunting and gatherer. We used to walk around, run, sit. We would look at the far distance. We would look nearby. We would be aware of the periphery because there could be a tiger there or a predator, etc. And in the same way, we alternated between movement, which was energy expenditure. That meant if we do too much of that, we would lose our weight. And famine was never very far away. And rest. And rest is very helpful because when we rest, we don't burn as many calories. But it was always this alternation back and forth. And now all of a sudden, in a totally new century, literally, we are still have the old body, still the old mechanisms, and now we just sit. And what we forget is when we sit, as many of us are doing, we're attending to the screen, so we are getting focused of our attention, we're getting slightly sympathetically activated, we're breathing slightly quicker often in our chest, and we just sit. And now our second heart is no longer working. What do you mean, second heart? That is our calf muscles. Biologically, physiologists think of your calf muscles as a kind of second heart. Because when you walk, the calf muscles would squeeze, tighten, and when the muscle tightens, it would squeeze the veins that are transporting the blood back to the heart. They would squeeze it so it would increase the circulation. And for many people, often as we get older, that our legs start swelling a little bit. That is the lymph, but it's also mainly due, a big component is due that we are no longer moving our legs. Just be a cashier and stand the whole day steadily, and then slowly the blood pools in our legs more and the fluids. While if you're walking, where you're pushing off of your toes, etc., the calf muscles would tighten and they would relax, and they would act as a pump to allow blood flow to go up more easily. In fact, it would even reduce the blood pressure. So that is a piece. The piece is even much bigger than that. Let me go back. A few of you, not all, but I can see one or two of you remember the time of typewriters. I can see there are others here who had never seen one. It's only what they saw in movies. But remember when people used to have typewriters? How come a typist had very few symptoms in proportion to people working at the computer? To me, that's an interesting question. And then one of the major ones was that if you're a typist, even if you'd be typing, your fingers would be moving, you would sit in the same seat. But then at the end of a sentence, your arm would come up, you would have to hit the return and continue typing. Well, if you were very affluent, you would have a Selectric typewriter, an IBM. You could use your pinky. You didn't have to do that. But still, at the end of the page, you would have to change your body movements, rotate the paper. Then you have to reach up to get a piece of paper, put it in there, and then when the page was finished typing, you either took it away, you would stand up, which I'm doing. I would walk to a file cabinet, file it away, or do something like that. So intrinsic in the typist task was alternation of movement, which is real, where it's an alternation in just sitting passively and moving. Now the computer, because really we want efficiency, not our bodies want it. We don't want to waste energy because who knows, I could starve next week. So when at the moment I sit or lie down, we know that experience, it's so much harder to get up. If you are watching a series on Netflix or on TV or whatever, streaming, once you start with one episode, you sit there and it's very seductive to click on the next episode and the next episode, and you stay locked in that position. And by the end, you feel sort of drained a tiny bit, although emotionally highly aroused. There's a final piece in here. There are two more pieces, if it's okay. One is that we forget, and that's critical with pain. It's critical with peak performance in sports, that what we see on a screen for our brain is reality. I want to underline that. We are not, through evolution, till the 1880s or 1870s, everything we ever saw was real. Then with photography, we could finally store memories. Before that, we never even had that history. You could really forget and be somebody else later. And then more recently, we could develop films and now a media. But for our brains, whatever comes into our eyes or ears, our brains are still wired like 40,000 years ago. It takes those images as reality. And if people doubt that, then I just tell them always, if my students the same way, because they say, no, I know the difference. It has no effect on me. And then I ask, okay, how many have seen a horror movie where somebody got assaulted or raped or whatever? I'm sorry for the difficulty with that. And then you saw this before going to sleep, and all of a sudden you could just go to sleep very peacefully. It had no effect. Or after you watch that movie, then all of a sudden you go outside and you hear some noises behind you. At that moment, you don't just think that it's a cat or a nice noise. Automatically, you think it is one of these horror things that could have happened to you in a movie. Is that familiar to any of you? I presume it is. And notice we forget that the images we see really affect our physiology. And that is, I think, really, so we not only have air pollution, as we talk about, environmental pollution, we have imagery pollution as well. And now before we go to bed at night, instead of being more peaceful, having the light go down and get quiet, instead we turn on the TV, we look at the last message on our cell phone because I want to update in social media. It's critical to know what I'm doing and what the other person is eating or how they're looking, and I want to comment on them. And I get emotionally stimulated. The blue light of the screen suppresses my melatonin, and my sleep is disturbed. And disturbed sleep is one of the curses, I would think, of our modern society and a precursor to many illnesses. If I put it into a different way, then I would say that much of our computer technology, which is great. I can see you. I can see Katie. I can see Debbie. I can at least know that Naomi is present. I can see Caitlin, and I can see Cindy. I can see you. I can see you reacting. It's great. From miles away, I can be connected to family members, find new ex-lovers, no, whatever they may be, right? However, it really acts as an evolutionary trap, and we underestimate the harm of that. And what do I mean by evolutionary trap? And I think this is really relevant for people with pain, etc. An evolutionary trap is where previous behaviors that supported our survival are now activated so much inappropriately that they cause harm. A classical example of this, which many of us are familiar with, is sugar, is sweet. Babies are wired by breast milk to like sweet, because sweetness in nature, almost anything that is sweet, contains calories. It contains food, is food. There are almost no poisonous substances that are sweet. No, there are. Pica, the lead paint. So that's why kids love the lead paint in old buildings, because it's sweet. But almost everything else we eat, if it is sweet, you can almost say, I can probably eat it. So we have no easy mechanisms in our biology to say, stop. Because we always want calories. We need calories, so we eat something sweet. This is a healthy, stimulus or healthy response. And now with our new industrialized farming, agribusiness, and highly processed foods, we now make this, we put this in front of everybody in stimuli. We go to the supermarket with kids, they see the candy bars, and what do they say? Please, I want a cookie, I want this, I want that, I want that. And then we blame the child for not having self-control. It is not just the child, it's that this is a natural, automatic response. It's almost, you have to override the natural drive to eat that food. So it is, the control is much more difficult. The same way would be with cell phones or media. I mean, I always wonder why a cell phone is called a cell phone, because I think of a cell phone, a cell, a prison is a cell, and now I'm captivated by the cell, and I have cell phone, and I cannot escape from it, just like a prisoner. But it's really true. If you check with students, they'll check 50, 60 times a day. Without any awareness, they reach for their phone and check for notifications. They have become addicted because it evokes that environmental or evolutionary trap. I need to upkeep with my peers in a small group. I need to upkeep, otherwise I would not survive. I can go for many others like this. And so think of the concept of an evolutionary trap. I'll end this diatribe with an example which I think is true, which probably exemplifies it best. This is not human work. This is the observation of albatrosses. And we have this great picture in the book where you see this and described in detail. If you go to an island called Midway, which is in the middle of the Pacific, 2,000 miles away from any other island, there are many albatrosses. And when you look at the beach, you see all these skeletons. You see feathers and the skeletons, and basically all the biological, the muscle, the fascia have been digested. What is left is the undigestible, the muscles, the feathers, and the previous undigested content of the gastrointestinal tract, all the pieces of plastic these birds have eaten. So they've all died because of malnutrition, eating plastic, not fish. How come? Well, until we polluted the ocean this much, these birds would just fly over the ocean. They would see something shimmering in the water. They would then go there, eat it, catch it. That is a small fish or a big fish, whatever it is. They would swallow it. They would either digest it for themselves or fly back and regurgitate it to their chicks. Now, however, they're flying and flying. They see the similar shimmering in the water. They dive, they eat it. It has a coating of algae on it. So the taste is almost the same, except it's a piece of plastic. They ingest this. Now this goes into their GI tract. It is not food. They may die of it, or they regurgitate it to their chicks. Now, should we blame the albatross for being so stupid that it can't discriminate between the fish or the piece of plastic? Or is it that basically the albatross have evolved to be able to really discriminate that shimmering object, and now we've substituted something poisonous? And some of the technology is very similar. We can thank our technological companies, our IT companies, for doing something. All the nice notifications you get, the dings, another notification. They're designed so we become addicted. Because the moment you look at this message, you get a slight update, you get a nice dopamine release. I feel better, and again, and again, and again. I am not saying technology is harmful, but it's an appropriate use. I don't know if that made any sense. So now you just want to wiggle for a moment. You know, you've been sitting much too long. Just for a moment, just wiggle, you know. You can even stand up. Why don't you just stand up? It is okay. I like standing for a moment. You know, you can just reach to the ceiling. Oh, yes, Caitlin, you can stand up too. I know it's very hard to reach up. And Kathy, just stand up too. Really get up, you know, and even stand on your toes for a moment. So your calves
This is
tighten.
what you get for turning your video on, guys.
Yes, I know.
You can
Absolutely.
see what you're doing.
And Debbie, even you can get up. Believe it or not. Just do it. Just for an instant. I know it feels horrible to do. I'll close my eyes so I can't see you. Okay.
Okay, so.
Great for doing it.
Yes. So
But check again. Check again. Did you feel better when you've done it?
Yeah.
Slightly, right? It's not a big thing. It's critical. And people who have depression, the more they sit, the more they slouch, the more they get depressed. Movement, exercise is one of the better antidotes. Yes, Cindy.
Yes. So what are some of the other risks of spending too much time on digital devices?
Well, there are many for many people. One, we tend to go because of the design of the new monetary what I'm trying to say is that the high-tech companies, Google, Facebook, essentially are monetized not for content, but to capture your attention and clicks. And so what happens is when you're going to Facebook, you don't see the whole world. Your feed will be different than anybody else's feed, because what they're showing you is what the algorithm says you will more likely stay with. So you see either more people like you, or it may move you to more violence or more extremism very quickly. So that is a real danger in our social network of doing some of this. This is even true for Google News searches. If you sit next to somebody, you put the same keyword in, you'll get different outcomes depending on your past searches.
Wow.
So we are getting very selective perspectives. That's one, almost a kind of abstract piece. If I think of many of the harms of sitting at the computer, obviously I'm sitting at the computer. How can I only say it's harmful? But one of it is that I'm looking only at this near distance, about 18 inches or so. For what that does, when I look at this distance and I do this for continuously, I get something called near visual stress. My eyes converge to focus. The lens have to focus. That causes total and kind of very subtle tension in the neck, even in my hips. And I'm unaware of this. And in our evolutionary past, we would never do that constantly. I'd be looking outside. I would look at a treetop. I would look up. Then I would look to the right, I would look to the left. I would continually be alternating near and far. The result is, and I don't know how many of you have had that experience now in the COVID-19 epidemic, that all of a sudden you're spending so much time on the screen that when you leave the screen, your eyes are almost more fuzzy when you look at the far distance. You get more fatigue. For children, I can predict what is happening. In Singapore, for example, 84% of young people become myopic by the time they're in high school. That means they get nearsighted. If you go to hunting and gathering society, such as the Bedouins in Israel, the Kung Bushmen in the Kalahari Desert, they tend to have 15-20 vision, even at older age. Their vision is better than us, and they're not nearsighted. So nearsightedness is not just something that happens because you get older. I'm sure there are some people for whom that happens. But for most, it's that we misuse our vision. We are now looking only in this near visual plane. Our eyes converge, that leads to that stress, and slowly our eyes change. I think it really is significantly harmful. So what can you do about it? I think that's the important part. Rule one would be purposely go out, look outside. If you're lucky enough, and you can look outside at a window, through the window, look at the far distance. And if you can see a tree, really look at the top of the tree, look at the leaves, look at all of this. Because when you look at the far distance, the eyes diverge, the pupil, the ciliary muscle around the lens relaxes, that reduces the strain. So that's one. Two, blink. We often don't blink. When we look at the screen, we keep looking in detail. Notice I don't want to miss anything because the tiger could be coming, and if I blinked, I would miss it. We get much more dry eyes, the most common experience of people working at computers, eye irritation. Let me give you a way, at least maybe, which you can relax your eyes more in both ways. We have described many of these techniques and reasons in our book, but let me take you through this one. What I want you to do in a moment is let me explain it first, then I'll guide you through it. I'll ask you to close your eyes, and then when you open your eyes, do it with a kind of surprise or fear, and inhale at the same time. So if I did it, my eyes are closed. Now, when I want to do it, I'm going to open my eyes and inhale at the same time. So I'm going to gasp and inhale. If you could see what I did. Did that make sense? So now just do that. Close your eyes. And now exhale. And at the end of exhalation, almost gasp and open your eyes at the same time wide. And keep them open like you're surprised. You know, you want to keep looking everywhere, keep looking around because there could be a tiger there. Be careful. And how many noted that you could feel your eyes getting almost slightly colder and almost drier? Right? Unknowingly, many of us do that the whole day long at the computer without knowing. Let me do it a different way. Close your eyes. Let the eyes almost feel like they're sinking through their sockets, like you don't care. Let them just drop down. Feel the weight almost there, the softness. Be sure your jaw is loose. Now I'd like you to just inhale through your nose. Let the air come into your nose. So your stomach gets bigger. And as your stomach is bigger, feel that. And now as you exhale, after you start exhaling, very gently and softly, let the eyes slightly open up, almost like you're looking through your eyelashes, almost like fuzziness. And feel almost a kind of heaviness in there. And as you've exhaled, now close your eyes again. Let the air come into your stomach with your eyes closed. And again, Let the air flow out very slowly and halfway through the exhalation, very softly, with a half smile almost. Open your eyelids, very soft. And what you may experience, I think that's it, is how many could feel when you did this the second way, you could almost get a kind of tearing going in. The eyes became slightly more moist. Kathy, is that what you experienced? Yes. It's the most common experience. If you practice this after a while, as if you can turn your own tearing up, but the eyes become more moist. And, but that's not how we normally look. When we look at the computer, I want to look. Versus saying, wait a minute, it's not life-threatening. There's no tiger there. There's no predator there. Well, depending on our politics. Instead, I just, but if I can do the inverse, before I look at the screen, I inhale in my stomach, close my eyes for a moment, let my eyes softly open. There's a sense of softness, and that allows the tearing to occur more. I mean, I can keep going on hundreds of different pieces, Cindy. I think the major one, which is so important for people with pain, is posture and breathing. As I said already earlier before this, that we have our big problem is really that we have sitting disease. That was one, so I'm going to skip that. The next one is our posture. If you now look at young people, their postures are different in their early 20s than 20 years ago. They're different. Their spines are different. This is noticeable in athletics. I was just had an interview with a coach from Canada today. That was their observations. They were shocked. Young people's upper spine are curved. They now have the iPhone neck. And if you look at almost anyone, when they use a cell phone, they're bending down. They're collapsing like this. And they don't do the counter opening. They don't arch up. They don't open up this way. They're putting their body in a defensive, hopeless body position, which is almost immune suppressant, I would argue, except they don't know it. We do know that people who use cell phones on the sidewalk get much more accidents and have a higher pedestrian deaths. Because when you're looking at the screen, you lose any awareness of your periphery. You shut down. But posture, so let me make a few comments about posture, because I think it's critical. Also, before doing that, let me talk about posture in terms of laptops. If you're using a laptop, there's no way you can use it appropriately. A laptop will always be an ergonomic compromise. In terms of ergonomics, what I mean is how can you sit appropriately to optimize your position? With a laptop, if your arms, your hands are at the right level, which should be my upper arms are hanging along the side of my body, then I bend my elbows at about 90 degrees, my arms are flat, and where my fingers are is where I should be, the keyboard ought to be, more or less. Or my tabletop, I can do that a little further up and bring my arms forward. If I do that, then the only way for me to see the screen is to tilt down like this. And that's what you see everybody do at historically at coffee shops. Now we all do it in the kitchen table or whatever office we have. The alternative is we can make the screen at the appropriate height. But when I do that, which I'm doing for me right now, then my keyboard is too high, so then I have to work like this. There's no compromise. There are easy economical solutions. I highly recommend that for all. If you're using a laptop, get an external keyboard. I have one here. You can't quite see it. I get an external keyboard. And so then I can raise my laptop screen on a stack of books or a fancy device. It makes no difference, depending on how much money you want to spend. And now I make the top of the laptop my eyebrows. And I can adjust it that way. Or alternatively, because my vision, I want to see a lot on my screen, and the laptop is too small to do my Excel or to do whatever, my email, then what I do instead, I can keep the keyboard of my laptop and I buy another external screen and I use that instead. But those are really the two compromises for anybody who's working at home. And if you want to be very fancy, which I have done in my office now, I have an external keyboard. The keyboard, in fact, splits out. It's like a kinesis keyboard. So my hands don't have to bend this way to work at the keyboard. The angle goes right away. The keyboard is split. And so I can use my hands and arms in a very comfortable position. So I can be erect. I can use the keyboard and the mouse. And my keyboard is not too wide, because the keyboard is very wide. The mouse goes next to it, and it means I extend to the side, and that increases the tension. And now finally, let me think of posture again. Most of us have our experience in our studies, most of us are unaware of posture. Because, we don't know that. We may know it later, but we don't really know it. So we forget that if you're a psychologist, you tend to think thoughts, emotions affect body. But that's really what biofeedback has demonstrated, and what the new physiology demonstrates, is that body changes thoughts and emotions just as much. It's just like when you're sick, your energy is down. You feel maybe less energetic. Wait a minute, it's a certain quality. You may be more negative. So let me think of posture that way. If you think of, let's think of dogs. When two dogs meet and they're trying to figure out, two male dogs meet, one will become the alpha male, that tail goes, the dominant one, its tail goes up, it is powerful, it expands in space. And the more that expands in space, even if it's smaller in actual size, the more will the opposite dog become defensive and submissive. It shrinks. Its tail tucks under. It makes itself smaller. It becomes powerless. Human beings are just like that. We have the similar patterns in terms of relationships. But we forget our body posture not only influences others by the opinions we make, it affects us ourselves. So let me put it even in a more important context. When you're, let's all do this. Is that okay? What I'd like you to do is stand up. I know, I like you to stand up.
I feel like I'm in church, stand up for the
yes,
song.
this is like oh my gosh. Yes. Oh, all of you just stand up. And for a moment, while standing, I'd like you to collapse and slouch. And then very slowly walk in place, very slowly, like you don't almost want to move your legs. Really, I mean, you're slouched and your hands, like your thumbs almost touch the side of your thigh. So your hands are rotating inward. Really, and just sort of slouch, walk in place like that. Keep walking, looking down. And you can do this obviously much longer at home with your friends. That's enough for a moment. Observe what happened to your energy. Did you feel happier? Did you feel more energized? Or did your energy may have dropped a bit? Now I'd like you to skip in place. You know what kids do, skipping, right? I don't care how you do it. Skipping, you sort of jump. You just skip, bring your arms up, look at the ceiling when you do this. And if you have pain, you just can do it with your arms or ill. Just skip for a moment, looking up. Just do it and really move. Jump up, look up. Good enough. We'll do it very short. I'll let you all sit again. My guess is that when you skipped, your energy went up. Is that correct? And when you slouch walked, your energy stayed the same or went down. What is so interesting is when we do studies, and we've published these, when you take people who have a history of depression, that those who slouch, those people lose them. Okay, let me say it this way. When you look at older people, some people, when they slouch walk, there's not too much change in their energy level. The people who had a history of depression, their energy drops the most. As if putting yourself in the body position of collapse amplifies the memories you're bringing up and supports the sense of depression. For all of them, when they do skipping, their energy level goes up to the same level. We forget that posture impacts us. For example, let me do it one more different kind of study. When you get very negative news, depressive news, you feel hopeless, overall, or you're defeated, you tend to collapse a bit, whether that's out of sadness or whatever. That's a normal human body response. There's nothing wrong with that for that moment. It just is. You can even see this at the Olympics. Somebody see an athlete comes in second place and they feel totally defeated and their whole body posture just collapses. But we forget that is, you could say, there's an event, a thought that triggers that. It's also conditioned. So when I put my body in this position, it also at the same time becomes the conditioned stimulus, just like Pavlov's dogs. When you give a piece of meat after a while, and you pair it with a bell, after a while the body posture is the bell to evoke those hopeless thoughts. And vice versa. Let me do that as an experiment, because I think this is really critical for people who have pain, and many people who have pain, it's harder to think optimistically. It's almost impossible. Okay? What I'd like you to do is, just as you're sitting, collapse slightly, slouch. Our normal cell phone slouch. And in this position of the cell phone slouch, I'd like you just to evoke hopeless, helpless, powerless memories, one after the other. Just do this for a moment or two. I'll let you do it for a little while. So each time an hopeless, helpless memory comes up, think of another one. Keep doing it. Keep evoking those hopeless, helpless memories. Defeated memories. Don't change your position. Keep your position identical. Now in the same position, evoke only optimistic, empowering memories. Don't lift your head. Evoke only optimistic, empowering memories, one after the other. And now shift your position, really arch up, get your, sort of almost bring your chest slightly up, arch your lower back a bit, look slightly upward above the horizon. And now while looking up, keep looking up, evoke only hopeless, helpless, powerless, defeated memories, one after the other. Keep looking up. And now, without changing your position, evoke only optimistic, empowering memories. I think that's enough. You can wiggle and move your body. And now the question is, which position was it easier to evoke the hopeless memories? How many found that in the collapsed position you had easier access? Right? I think, and when you were in the up position, you could still access it. However, For many people, they report they get a kind of distance from it. They were not captured as much with it. And what is so interesting, we have published this research. It works almost with everyone within reason. There's a noticeable difference. And when you actually record the brain activity, what you see is most interesting. When you're in the slouched position, the brain has to work significantly harder to evoke positive memories than when it's in the up position. And now I use that concept combined with cognitive therapy or thinking. So when people want to change their thoughts and images, which we often want to do, to get out, change your body position, take a breath, and then change your thoughts, versus only trying to struggle and change your thoughts. And sometimes, Cindy, when I think of therapy, when so many people, patients who are uncomfortable, sit in a recliner chair, and the moment I look at the recliner chair, it puts the person in this slouched, depressive position. And I now purposely have a chair, which I use, and I give the person a little pillow, and I put it behind their mid-back so they can arch up more. And it's slightly easier for them to have to evoke positive memories. Or when you feel depressed at home, what do? We sit on the couch and watch television, Netflix, streaming, whatever. And we sit in a slouched position. Well, change your chair, put a pillow in your lower back, at least mid-back, so you have a more arched up position. Or if you want to automatically look up more, take the pictures of your loved ones, of your children, your parents, or positive memories. When you put them, don't put them on your table, put them slightly above eye level, so you automatically have to look up. You know, think of the language we use. We look upward to get inspired. We go down to be as a downer. We are an upstanding citizen. You know, we just slouch and collapse. These are metaphors. They do have a major impact into our emotions and brain. And it's doable. It's not easy, and we don't know it. So in fact, what I now often do with people, I mean myself as well, we use biofeedback to remind people that they're slouching. So we use a device called Upright Go. You can buy it on Amazon. As a disclaimer, I get no money from the company. I wish they gave me money for it, but I get zero money, but I think it works well. I think they're now like 60 bucks. There's a little device about this big. You put it on your spine. You calibrate it to your cell phone, where you can say I'm sitting up straight. You calibrate it. Takes a little bit of work to figure that out, but their instructions are quite good. And now when I'm working and I start slouching, which I'm totally unaware of, it starts vibrating. Nobody knows it except me. Oops, I just slouched. And when you have now do this as a study, you observe people slouch when they get tired. They slouch when they have hopeless thoughts. For women, they slouch often when they cross their legs, which our culture has made women more powerless that way because of the clothing we often do. And yet you're more powerful if you're sitting up. Besides that, if you're slouching, you cannot breathe in your abdomen as easily. Your breathing, it tends to be quicker and more shallow. On the other hand, if you're up, your abdomen can expand more, you have more space. And that by itself may even help people's digestion. It feels more empowering. And if you feel anxious, breathe lower. When you inhale, let your abdomen expand. Just what we always wanted, to have a bigger stomach. But when you exhale, let the stomach get smaller. And then when you inhale, with very quietly, let the stomach widen again. These are the skills which even pain patients can do. And then if you move at all, whenever you anticipate pain, and I think here's the critical part, or do a task that could be painful, what most of us do is we freeze. We almost gasp, we hold our breath, and then we do it. Do the opposite. If I know potentially it could be painful, like standing up because I have hip pain, what I do is I inhale in my stomach. That is the sympathetic side being activated. And then I start exhaling, ideally through my nose, but it's often easier initially to exhale through the mouth with a very soft sound. And as I exhale, I'm relaxing my shoulders. And then I stand up while I continue to exhale. And when you do the painful activity during the exhalation phase, the pain often is reduced by 50% for that moment. It's the quickest way to do it. You know, if you ever had to go to the dentist and you know they may give you a needle or something, we already go ouch before the needle hits us. If on the other hand, what I tell my dentist to do is wait, don't do it yet. I'm gonna hum or go, oh. They're pumping in mouth. I can make that noise tonight. And I only want you to inject me once you hear the sounds I'm making. So I'm exhaling. And when I'm exhaling, it's harder to trigger the sympathetic arousal. Think of it when you inhale with pain. You're taking in the sensations. You're amplifying them. If I exhale, I quiet it and let it go. So there are many other factors that are involved. I realize I look at the clock already. I've talked for a while. We did not give you any opportunities to ask questions. So before or Cindy.
Well, I was going to ask you to do a little more, talk a little bit more about chronic pain and using digital devices, how they're connected.
There are two parts. One, I would say when you're watching, digital devices are multiple. Ones are the social networking ones. The second are games. And the third one is the media we may see, news. The first rule I would say is turn off the news. I don't mean to be naive. Once a week, update yourself or spend 15 minutes listening to the detrimental news. And I think that's enough. Because all you do is you get angry or frustrated. I think that's one. Two, remember what you see impacts you. So I always go back to Norman Cousin's perspective with pain. And he pointed out after he had alkylating spondylitis, that's a very painful, like an arthritic condition, horribly severe, for which there was no cure. He essentially took himself out of the hospital because he realized he could be in a nice hotel, have the doctor visit him there, and it was much cheaper, and he got great room service. And then he watched humor movies and laughter. It's a little simplistic, focus on laughter and going outward. Three, however severe pain you have, see if you can go outward to some other people. Do something for someone else. When we go outward to others, our pain slightly is reduced. There's a lovely exercise I do with my students called Gratitude Visit, which I borrowed from Marty Seligman, in which what you do is you go back in your life and you think of the people who made a positive impact on you, who really did something for you which impacted you significantly positively, not negatively, positively, and you never thanked them. And whether it's your parent, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a neighbor, whether it's a lost friend, unimportant. But notice what you're doing in this exercise. One, you're starting to evoke positive memories versus negative ones. You're searching for those moments which occur. That's two. Second, now once you identify one of those people, then write a lovely gratitude note to them. So you write about a 300-word essay thanking them for what they have done. So that's descriptive. And then point out how what they did has impacted your life. So not just a description, but what they did really positively affected and impacted your life. And now the difficult part comes. Then you call them up and make a visit. Now, right now, the visit will have to be via Zoom. Normally, you must do it in person. But even with Zoom, make an appointment with them. Don't tell them yet why. And then when you meet with them, you read them their gratitude visit. What is so interesting that people do it, whether they are severely in pain or other things, when they do that, the other person feels there's a deepening of human connection, the warmth, and their immune system is better. It's one of the most deeply touching exercises I know. I recommend that. That is a kind of, there are many things one pain patients can do from this kind of work with digital devices. Posture is critical. Don't be immobilized. Pain immobilizes you often. But notice if I have hip pain, I can still roll my shoulders. If I have shoulder pain, I can wiggle my foot. I know some people have such fibromyalgia that everything hurts. Do little movements. It's important and critical. 5, do investigate your diet. I'm totally persuaded. When I look at my hand, just look at your own hand for a moment. And look how nice it is. Just take a look at it. Look at the fingers, look at the nails, look at the wrinkles or whatever on the skin. Remember, every part of your hand is created by the food you ate, the food I ate. We are, the food is our medicine, let medicine be thy food. The food we take in is the structure by which we become. People often forget that. So at least, and it's idiosyncratic. I don't want to be absolutist. Some people can eat lots of sugar, have no effect. Others can eat no sugar and it has an effect. Be aware that the foods have impact. And there are some classical strategies by which you can start identifying maybe whether you could be reactive to food. But at least eat organic food from my perspective. You know, avoid snacking. And don't eat any foods that have milk that, when you look at the label, are words you can't pronounce. So that means the whole center part of the grocery store are not there. That's 2. 3, teach slow diaphragmatic breathing. Really do that. Remember, when I breathe in my chest, I increase my heart rate, I increase arousal. If I can learn lower breathing, it's better. And that takes practice. You do that with heart rate variability. You can do it with coaching. I recommend look at my blog. There are a number of examples where people have done that. 4, transfer that into the real world. It's not good enough to do it lying down or sitting. How can you do it at the kitchen sink? When I'm cutting something, am I raising my shoulder way up or can I drop my shoulder? Can I keep breathing when I do the tasks? That's 4. 5, on the emotional side, we often blame ourselves or others. We have a lot of resentments. Just one needs to accept whatever happened, happened. You did the only thing in your past you could have done. Often people say, no, that isn't the case. I should not have done something. No, you did not have the skills yet to not do that. So in a way, be self-accepting, smile, wake up. 6, in the morning when you wake up, we often already anticipate pain before we even have it. Remember, when we have an image, it really is a pattern that really triggers the body in that pattern. And so when you wake up, stop, take a deep breath, and at least say, today is a new day. I don't yet know what the future brings. 7 or 8, do some activity you enjoy. That's something, after a while, it's very hard. You may not be able to do much. I'm agreeing. You may not be able to run a marathon. You may not be able to go for long hikes in the woods. Start exploring other things. The key is, the error many patients make, in my experience, they want to be like they were before their pain, before their injury. You can never be before. If you are back just like you were before, you become just like you are now. All you can do is you can say, I'm here. How can I find new options to grow? And there are a couple of great TED Talks I highly recommend, and I can send those to you. You know, there's a lovely shepherd, an Australian young woman who was horribly damaged in a car accident. She should have died many times, was in horrible pain, was paralyzed. And then all of a sudden she had meaning, she wanted to become a pilot. I won't tell the whole story. It's really worthwhile to watch. Then if I give me a minute, 30 seconds, and I'll find the link because I just assigned it to my students.
Well,
So
I can send it. I have everybody's email, so I
great.
can send it later.
It's a very inspirational one because it applies for pain patients. You have to look. So often we think we have 10 units of pain, and the only time we're well is when we're 0. No. I want to go from 10 to 9.8, then 9.7. And I want to celebrate those small changes and see how I can move those. But we tend not to do that as much. We can use many visualization techniques. And finally, and gimmick, because it's so hard. When you have pain, it's almost impossible not to think about it or to catastrophize about it. I often, and people often teach patients mindfulness meditation to do this. I find in my experience that's great, but often difficult to do. Because your brain is too quiet and the thought just boom, boom, boom. The monkey mind takes over. The experience we found with our students and with patients is if they do something like chanting or toning, it works better. Chanting can be singing prayer, it makes no difference what, but when you are doing the words or making a tone, you're occupying that part of the brain that normally is the monkey mind. It's much easier. So a classic toning exercise, if you did a study with this, which works much quicker to quiet the mind, is either humming, you hum a tone, and you hum for 5 minutes. Or you make a tone like, ah, and then next breath again, ah. Why don't you all do something like that for a moment? Your mics are off anyway, I can't hear you. And so if you're off key, I won't notice it at all. But just do that for a moment. So you inhale, put your hands on your stomach, feel your stomach getting bigger when the air comes in. And then make that sound like an ah. Ah. And then let the air flow in again through your nose. Let your stomach get bigger. And again. Ah. And again. And do this for like 10 minutes. What is so interesting when you do that, Cindy, is that people start breathing very slowly, about 6 or 5 breaths a minute. They get automatic heart rate variability, and the brain often stops. I'm not doing any different than almost all religious traditions have done, or spiritual traditions, where people chant together, hum together, sing together, and they tend to feel better in that companionship.
Your voice just got a lot softer, so it was hard to hear you.
Okay. What I'm saying is that these kind of exercises are not new. They're really old. They're part of the traditions of spiritual traditions, what people do in churches, in temples, in mosques. They do it together. And when they make this sound for that moment, it evokes this quietness inside. And I would recommend pieces like that. Life is challenging, no disagreement. For many of the techniques, finally, I would recommend you may enjoy my new book, or our new book, which we did with my colleagues Rick Harvey and Nancy Faas. I think you'll find it very useful. Hopefully you'll recommend it to all your friends.
So I just have a couple more questions.
Sure.
So in your book, you talk about how it's not just the digital device itself, but what it takes us away from doing, that increases depression, social isolation. So could you talk a little bit about that?
To be on what I talked about in terms of posture is one part, we collapse. So the technology forces that way. 2, we tend to communicate this way. And so far I know, even though it's great to see you, it's great to see Debbie, or it would be great to see Nomi, or great to see Kafi who are online. It is totally different if we're in a room together and then maybe I could reach out and touch your hand or shoulder. And we know in medicine and even in psychology that when a patient has pain, words can be helpful, but a very gentle, caring touch is magic. You know, if someone has hip pain, all you do is you put your hand on that area of pain, especially if you have tender, warm hands, have the person take a breath, put your hand on that area and then stroke it right down the leg, for example, and often the pain will be reduced just in the contact of touch. We are mammals, and as mammals, we need to be touched. And I always remember that when my parents were much older, they were living in Florida, and when my kids were younger, there's little kids. When we took the kids there, all these older people would be reaching out. They want to touch these kids. It's really, we live in an abnormal world. We need more social connection. It's great that the web can make that connection. I think it is more worthwhile to make real connections with your neighbor. You know, in this moment of isolation, even if you cannot see them, or meet with them except at 6 feet with a mask on, which I do recommend the mask, by the way. Make them a cup of soup, hand it to them, or make a pot of soup and give it to your neighbor. It brings a smile, or whatever it may be. And we live in social isolation. And I think, and for kids especially, I think the web really becomes a trap of immobility and a kind of social isolation, because the world is more interesting on the screen than in real worlds. And I get very discouraged, not discouraged, but that you look at younger people now, their depression rates have doubled since we have started our cell phone use. Their anxiety rates have doubled. There's a significant increase in suicide rates in teens. Teens should not give suicide. That's crazy. But what do? You're on Snapchat. You're on Instagram. You post a picture of yourself. And then somebody says, oh, you look great. And then somebody says, you have a little mole in your face, or your nose is too big. And that one negative comment is 10 times as powerful as all the positive comments. And in fact, you see an epidemic of young people going to plastic surgeons, wanting to change their faces because it is not perfect as on the screens. It's a disaster in that sense. It doesn't mean don't use it. I would just say limit the use of time. I can give many more, but that's... And the final piece is that of attention. I think of you went to school, you had to study, you have to direct your attention outward to things you may or may not like. You had to bring the focus outward. That takes training and skill and mastery. Now children are trained the opposite way. We have a stimulus out there that captures your attention. You don't have to attend. It takes you. You react biologically because that's a new stimulus. And then just as you're there, a new stimulus occurs. So we have forgotten, we have not mastered that skill of focus, and that contributes to our attention deficit and other, I think, difficulties. That's my biases. But I can justify these from research.
Yeah.
So in the end, I think each of us should take some time off from the screen. I see your great background, although it's probably artificial, but go outside, walk through the woods. I'm lucky I live in Berkeley. This is not my background, but it's about 2 miles away from where I live, where I go hiking. I can go right in the hills, and I do this almost most days, and it's just great. And I'm lucky today that the air is much better. The smoke has passed. And so now it's just fog. And I think each of us should go remember the roots where we came from an evolutionary perspective. Go outside, be in nature. And then the final piece is for each of us, I highly recommend you practice breathing through your nose all the time. When you inhale and when you exhale, for the simple reason it will slow your breathing. When your breathing slows, it balances the sympathetic nervous system. And even more important, when you inhale, you're inhaling through your nose, and your nose produces, the nasal cavity produces nitric oxide, which acts as a slight antiviral and antibacterial agent, and also enhances the gas exchange in the lungs. So in fact, in the age of COVID-19, I really recommend that for all of you.
Well, thank you. So I'm wondering if we could open it up in case anybody
Sure.
has any questions. If you want, you could unmute yourselves if you have any questions.
I have a logistical question.
Sure, Debbie.
Is this going to be similar to the talk that you're doing with the through the AAPB on Thursday?
I have no idea what we'll do. No, Rick and I were going to do it and talk. I have no idea. It's going to be a total common chat, and you can just ask questions.
Okay,
It should just be a chat.
gotcha.
So, and besides, you don't have just me, you have Rick.
Yes. And then I have a question about nose breathing, because I have patients often ask me this, like if they're exercising or running or something, is it okay to you know, not breathe through their nose then when they're having more physical activity?
And the reason I'm pausing is the answer is probably yes, no, and
Okay.
both. Obviously, you need to breathe. If you really do heavy labor, you need to breathe through your mouth because you cannot upkeep the carbon dioxide and gas exchange. I think that is clear. It is possible to start practicing more to breathe through your nose, and I would highly recommend that. And any of the people who have a tendency of airway irritation, where they have a history of asthma or anything like that, I would really push them to try to exercise by breathing through their nose only. Initially, it's unbelievably hard, I can promise. There's another part to that, that if you observe runners, what you see, a runner occurs when you look at a race in running or jogging, that in the first mile, many people, then the snot in their nose starts running out. I don't know if you ever observed that. It's a very common observation. As if, and the question is, why does that occur? You know, it occurs because they're moving their arms like this. So when you're doing movements where the arms swing, where you stimulate the axillary area underneath your arm, you can also massage it if you want for a long time. You're like tickling yourself fairly deeply, but this kind of really movement of the arms across, that stimulates to open the nasal pathway on the opposite side. And it will clear the mucus that's been, whatever the material is there, the snot comes out. And so what we observe for many people who have congestion, like hay fevers and stuff like that or whatever, you know, people are often congested. With my students, if we do this for about 5 or 8 minutes, they all of a sudden notice their nose open up. And if you look at the people who often are congested in here, you see that their arms are rigid and they move, when they bend, their arms move more at the elbow and the upper, like they would be moving more like this. I'm exaggerating, but not like this. And you can always predict who will be slightly sick when they walk. It's like having this young spring in their body, their arms really move. That will help open this up. It takes significant practice. There's a book by McEwen, M-C-K-E-O-W-N, McEwen, called The Oxygen Advantage. And I would recommend doing those practices if they're athletes.
Okay.
You know, in the end, there's nothing wrong with mouth breathing, doing it sometimes. I am working for myself now, and I blow it most of the time in speaking in between sentences, unless I become aware, is to just inhale through my nose. And I know that for people who have high blood pressure, when they talk, their blood pressure usually goes up. You can do this, it's very old research by Paskowitz. If you teach them to now talk, inhaling through their nose, their blood pressure doesn't often go up. But almost I have to give you space. Because now when I inhale through my nose, you could interrupt me. That means that's okay. Okay.
Anybody else have any questions?
Kathy? Any questions? Naomi?
I was wondering, Eric, if you have any more tips for helping the eyes to relax.
I would recommend the book by Meyer Schneider. I really mean that, called Vision for Life. He is probably, even though he is a PhD, he has his private practice, he's the most knowledgeable person I know, probably in the United States and Europe, of if you have eye problems, how to fix those. And he has hundreds of little exercises to do it. I mean, the classic one is, like in the Bates technique, is palming, if you're familiar with that. But the key of palming is you have to bring your elbow up enough that you are erect. And so you're not pressing on the cheekbone. It just covers your head like this. So I put a stack of books underneath my elbows to support that. And then walk backwards. That is often helpful to loosening the neck. Much more. It also lets you get better peripheral vision. That will help. When you're outside, don't look only at the ground. Look far, look at all the small details of the leaves at the crowns of the trees or the rooftops. It depends where you live. I don't know where you live, Kathy.
Hopefully there's trees there.
And then especially relax your neck and shoulders. And when, for my bias, if you go to an optometrist and you get your glasses corrected, and if you're myopic, do not get it corrected. Do not get the glasses at 20/20. Have them corrected to about 20/25 or 20/30. Because then what happens is eyes usually fluctuate. Sometimes you have more focus and less focus. And this way you allow them to be, to have the flexibility. And finally, if you're wearing progressive glasses, that's very difficult at the computer. Because with progressive glasses, you're really looking for a very narrow window slit to keep it open in focus. You don't know it, but that stiffens your neck, because if you go a little bit down, then you'll be looking at too far away and you don't know you're doing this, so your neck stiffens, which also interferes with circulation.
So you're saying get computer glasses?
I would definitely get computer glasses for the computer if that's what you're doing. And then measure how you like to sit and where the screen is. Take a ruler and then bring that to the optometrist and say, this is the distance I want them to be in focus. Because you're Cindy, you're not Eric Pepper. Your computer system is set up differently. And then I would get glasses that are very big. Because what happens when you have glasses that are like this, a rim, you are cutting away your peripheral vision. You don't know that, but that happens. And if you reduce peripheral vision, you have slightly more potential of eventually getting some degenerative eye diseases. We really need that peripheral vision, these changes in here, to keep the eye healthy. But we now live in a world where we don't do that. But I think the Mayor Schneider is brilliant.
Sorry.
Go on, Debbie.
What are your thoughts on blue light blocking glasses?
My personal bias says turn the computer off or the screen off an hour before sleep. I think that's much smarter.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No,
And then also when you look at the screen, leave it. Go out, move, wiggle, dance. Okay. Well, I thank you all. And thank you so much, Cindy, for inviting me.
Well, I'm so glad that you came. It's very interesting and informative. So where can people get more information?
Well, I'll do an unabashed ad. I think our book, Tech Stress, you can see it in the background there, or you can see it right here. It does really exist. I would highly recommend, and I would recommend that you tell all your friends that. It's how technology is hijacking our lives, strategies for coping, and pragmatic ergonomics. They're all intertwined. And I think it's useful. That's one. Two, I do a blog called pepperperspective.com, and that's pepper with one P. And if I show that slides, and you can also see where Cindy is, let me put it on the next screen for a moment. That'll be easy. Then you can see here's our contact information. I'm Eric Pepper, my email, a blog I do called pepperperspective.com. I have a website for clients as well when I see them, biofeedbackhealth.org. And Cindy Perlin, as you can see, her email is info@patienttreatmentdirectory.com, and she has a great website called paintreatmentdirectory.com. I
Well,
look
thank you
forward
so
to
much.
my pleasure. I think, Cindy, you have to turn it off. You have to stop the recording
Okay.
and save it to the web or however that goes. Well, I thank you all for participating.